The goat that refuses the stream will one day beg the stream to come to it.
That will never be me.
My name is Leila, and if you had told me 3 years ago that I would be sitting in a small room singing a lullaby to a grown woman who shares my mother's face, I would have laughed loudly without shame. But life has a way. There's an old African saying that my grandmother never got tired of repeating. She would say, "The goat that refuses to drink from the stream will one day beg the stream to come to it." I heard those words my whole childhood. I just never once believed they were talking about me. Let me take you back to where everything began. I grew up in Nakasero Ridge, a city that breeds ambition. The kind of city where the morning traffic is already loud before the sun fully rises, where the women are stunning and sharp, where everyone is building something or chasing something. I belonged there. I was made for it. We were 3 daughters. Justin was the eldest, Kemi was the last born, and I, Leila, was the one in the middle. Which in any African home means you are somehow the most overlooked and the most leaned on all at once. Our father passed away when Justin was 10, I was 8, and little Kemi had just turned 5. There was no slow grieving in our house, no long period of falling apart. Mama Justine, the whole neighborhood called her that, Mama Jess, or Mama Jess when she was in a gentle mood. She buried her husband, wiped her face, and went back to work before the funeral flowers had even dried. She worked in a textile factory on the east end of Nakasero Ridge. The same factory, the same shift, for close to 20 years. She came home smelling like thread and machine oil every evening, but she always paused at the front door, smoothed her wrapper, and walked in with a smile, like the exhaustion had no business following her inside. Like we were too precious to see how heavy she was carrying. We saw it. We always saw it. We just loved her too much to say so. Mama Jess raised us in the family house, a solid, modest home on a quiet street in the older part of Nakasero Ridge. Not flashy, not poor either, just a real home. Concrete walls painted the color of warm cream, a small front yard where she kept her tomato plants, curtains she sewed herself in deep burgundy, a sitting room with good chairs and a television that had been there since before I could remember. Everything in that house had her fingerprints on it. Everything smelled like her, cocoa butter and groundnut soup, and something warm I still cannot name. By the time I turned 28, I had built a life she was proud of. Senior officer at Greenleaf Bank, one of the most respected financial institutions on the ridge. I had my own apartment in the city, a place I bought myself, 2 bedrooms, clean lines, modern kitchen, a balcony that looked out over the lights of Nakasero Ridge at night. I wore my braids long, twisted and laid. My outfits were always deliberate, deep plum, cobalt blue, rich wine red, ivory silk. A woman who knew exactly what she was doing when she got dressed in the morning. I paid Mama Jessie's utility bills without being asked. I stocked her kitchen every Friday. I told her more times than I can count, "Mama, leave that factory. You have suffered enough. Let me take care of you." She would hold my face in both hands, look at me the way only a mother can, and say, "Leila, my child, a woman who stops moving starts disappearing." Then she would go back to work. Stubborn, beautiful, completely impossible. Now, let me tell you about my sisters, because you need to understand what I was watching all those years and why I made the decisions I made. Justine, my elder sister, had married a man named Ronald when she was 27. Good man, calm, reliable, the kind of man who fixed things around the house without being asked. I respected him. But I watched Justine after that wedding like I was watching a documentary. She had been a secondary school teacher before she married. Passionate, dedicated, the kind of teacher whose students came back years later just to say thank you. Then the twins arrived, 2 boys, and just like that, she was home, full time. Ronald worked, Justine raised children,
and the classroom that once lit her up became a memory. She never complained, not once, but I watched her eyes when someone asked what she did. That half-second pause, that small smile that didn't quite reach everywhere it used to reach. I stored that image in my chest, like a lesson. Kemi was different. Kemi married a man who took her to America less than a year after the wedding, relocated her like she was a piece of luggage, lovingly but completely. She called on Sundays, she sent money when she could. She existed in our lives mostly as a voice and a face on a screen. Mama Jess kept a framed photo of Kemi on the kitchen shelf and dusted it every morning without fail. Never complained about that either. As for me, I had decided, quietly, firmly, without drama. Marriage was not my story. Children were not in my plan. I loved my life exactly as it was. My apartment was peaceful. My career was growing. My weekends were mine. People called me cold. I called myself clear. Leila, you will change one day, Mama Jess would say, not even looking up from her cooking. Mama, I will not. That soft smile again. That knowing, unbothered, almost mischievous smile. The one that said, my child, God has already written the end of this story, and you have not even read the first page. I should have taken that smile more seriously. It was a Tuesday. Ordinary, unremarkable. I was in a client review meeting on the 14th floor when my phone vibrated on the table. Unknown number. I let it go. It rang again. Immediately. Something in my stomach shifted. I stepped out. A woman's voice, breathless, apologetic. Please, is this Leila, daughter of Mama Justine from Nakasero Ridge textile factory? The floor felt different under my feet. I don't remember ending the call. I don't remember the elevator or the car park or starting the engine. I only remember sitting in my car with both hands on the steering wheel, the city moving around me like nothing had changed, and everything inside me completely still. I drove to Ridgeway General Hospital in 15 minutes, a drive that should have taken 30. I don't know how I did it. I don't remember the traffic lights or the turns. My hands just carried me there. When I walked into that hospital, the smell hit me first. That sharp, clean, cold smell that hospitals have, the kind that tells your body before your mind does that something serious is happening here. A nurse at the front desk recognized the panic on my face before I even opened my mouth. Mama Justin's daughter? I nodded. She walked me down a corridor that felt like it had no end. Mama Just was lying in a bed surrounded by machines that beeped quietly and tubes that I could not look at for too long. She looked small. That was the first thing that broke me. This woman who had always seemed so large to me, so solid, so immovable, like the walls of the family house itself. She looked small in that bed. Her chest was rising and falling. That was all I had to hold on to. The doctor on duty introduced himself as Dr. Mugisha. Tall, composed, with the kind of steady voice that people in crisis desperately need to hear. He explained what had happened. She had collapsed from exhaustion, complicated by an underlying condition they had not caught early enough. Her brain had been deprived of oxygen for a period of time. They had stabilized her, but she was in a coma. For how long? I asked. We cannot say for certain, he said. We wait. So I waited. I called Justin from the hospital corridor. She picked up on the second ring, and before I finished the sentence, she was crying. She said she would come. She came that same evening, her stomach round and heavy with 6 months of pregnancy, her twins running ahead of her through the hospital entrance like they owned the building. I watched her lower herself into the chair beside Mama Jessie's bed and hold our mother's hand, and I had to walk out of the room because I was not ready for anyone to see my face. I called Kemi next. The time difference made it complicated. She picked up sounding sleepy, then immediately awake, then immediately guilty. She said she would try to get a flight. Try, she said. That word sat in my stomach like a stone. 3 days passed, then 5, then 7. On the 9th day, Mama Jess opened her eyes. I was in the chair beside her bed when it happened. I had been there since 5 in the morning, my cobalt blue blazer folded over my lap, my braids pinned up because I had stopped caring about how I looked somewhere around day 4. I was reading something on my phone, not really reading, just staring, when I heard the softest sound. I looked up. Her eyes were open, blinking slowly, looking at the ceiling like she was trying to understand it. "Mama," I whispered. She turned her head toward me, and something inside me soared, just for a second, just long enough to hurt more when it fell. Because the eyes that looked back at me were not my mother's eyes, not the eyes of the woman who raised me, who dusted Kemi's photo every morning, who smiled like she already knew how every story ended. These eyes were wide and uncertain and a little frightened, like a child waking up somewhere unfamiliar. "Auntie," she said. Her voice was small, soft. "Where is my mama?" The room tilted. I pressed the call button with one hand and held hers with the other, and I smiled at her. God knows how I smiled. And I said, "It is okay. You are safe." Dr. Mugisha came within minutes. He ran his assessments gently, calmly, asking her simple questions. What was her name, how old she was, what year it was. She answered some, got others completely wrong. When he asked her age, she held up 5 fingers and looked at him like that was the most obvious thing in the world. He called me outside the room. He explained it carefully, the way doctors do when they are delivering something they know will take time to land. The coma, the oxygen deprivation, the impact on memory. Her mind had retreated, gone back, to somewhere safe, somewhere early. She was not faking. She was not confused in the way a sick person is confused. Her mind had fully returned to the age of 5. She would need familiar faces, familiar surroundings, consistent care, patience, and love to have any chance of slowly finding her way back. "Is it permanent?" I asked. "We don't know yet," he said. "But the worst thing for her right now is unfamiliar environments and strangers. She needs someone close, someone she loves." I already knew what he was going to say before he said it. I called Justin that night. She cried again, but we both knew. 6 months pregnant, 2 boys already pulling the house apart at the seams. She could not do it. She could barely stand for long periods. We did not even argue about it. We just sat in the silence of the phone call and understood each other. Kemi's flight kept getting pushed. Work, commitments. "I am trying, Leila. I promise I am trying." I stopped responding after the 3rd message. There was no one else. I went back to Greenleaf Bank the next morning, walked into my manager's office, and requested an extended leave of absence. He looked at me across his desk. This man who had known me for 6 years, who had never once seen me leave early or miss a deadline. And he said, "Leila, are you sure?" "No," I told him honestly, "but I'm going anyway." I took Mama Jess home 4 days later. Not to her house, but to my apartment in the city because the doctor said familiar faces mattered more than familiar walls right now, and I needed to be close to Ridgeway General in case anything changed. I set up my 2nd bedroom for her, bought a small nightlight because Dr. Mugisha said children, and she was a child right now, we had to accept that. Children do not like complete darkness. I stood in the doorway of that room the night before she arrived and looked at the nightlight glowing softly on the wall. I, Leila, the woman who chose silence, the woman who chose peace, the woman who had built her entire life around the beautiful, blessed absence of children and their noise and their needs, I had just bought a nightlight. God doesn't give you what you ask for. He gives you what you need, even when you're on your knees begging for something else. I understood that saying for the first time standing in that doorway. The next morning, Mama Jess arrived at my apartment in a soft lilac dress Justin had packed for her. She walked in slowly, holding Dr. Mugisha's nurse's hand, looking around my apartment with wide, curious eyes. She touched the walls. She looked at the balcony. Then she looked at me. "Auntie," she said, "do you have juice?" I swallowed everything I was feeling, walked to the kitchen, and poured her a glass of juice. This, I thought, is my life now. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe so you never miss the next part. And I had no idea at all, that it was going to change me in ways I never saw coming.
The first week was the hardest week of my life. And I say that as a woman who once worked 48 hours straight to close a merger deal that saved her bank's biggest client. I say that as a woman who buried her father at 8 years old and held her mother's hand through the whole funeral because someone had to. I have known hard, but nothing prepared me for this. Mama Jess woke up every morning at 5. Not gently, not quietly. She woke up the way 5-year-olds wake up. Suddenly, completely, like a switch had been flipped somewhere inside her. One moment silence, the next moment she was standing at my bedroom door in her nightgown calling out, "Auntie, Auntie, I am hungry." The first morning it happened, I sat up in bed and stared at her silhouette in the doorway for a full 10 seconds before I remembered, before my brain caught up with my reality. This was my mother. This was Mama Jess, the woman who used to wake up before everyone else to make sure breakfast was ready before we left for school, the woman who never asked anyone for anything if she could help it. Now she was standing at my door asking for porridge. I got up, I made the porridge. She sat at my kitchen counter swinging her legs because they did not reach the floor from the high stool, and she ate with both hands wrapped around the bowl, blowing on it the way children do, and she looked up at me with Mama Jess's face, the same nose, the same cheekbones, the same ears I had looked at my whole life, and she said, "Auntie, this is sweet." I turned back to the sink so she would not see my face. I had rules in my apartment. Quiet mornings, no noise before 8, everything in its place, a clean, ordered, intentional life that I had built and maintained with great discipline. Within 3 days, Mama Jess had rearranged my sitting room because she wanted space to dance. She had pulled every throw pillow off my sofa and lined them up on the floor for reasons I never fully understood. She had found my good wine-red silk scarf, the one I wore to boardroom presentations, and tied it around her head like a party ribbon. I found it on a Tuesday afternoon and stood in the middle of my sitting room holding it, looking at the crumpled silk, and I did not know whether to laugh or sit down on the floor and cry. I sat down on the floor and cried. I cried quietly, quickly, the way women who are holding everything together allow themselves to fall apart briefly, privately, and then it is over. I wiped my face, stood up, smoothed my dress, and went to find her. She was on the balcony talking to a pigeon. Seriously, a pigeon had landed on the balcony railing and she was leaning over, hands on her knees, having a full conversation with it. "Where do you live?" she was asking it. "Do you have a mama?" Something cracked open in my chest, something I did not have a name for yet. "Mama Jess," I said softly. She turned around. "Auntie, there's a bird, come and see." I walked to the balcony and stood beside her and looked at the pigeon. It stayed there for a moment longer, ruffled its feathers, and flew away. She watched it go with her whole face. "It went home," she said, "to its mama." I put my hand on her shoulder and said nothing. Dr. Mugisha came for her checkup twice a week. He was always calm, always thorough, always careful with her in a way that I noticed and stored somewhere quietly. He would sit across from her and ask her questions in a gentle voice, and she always answered him with complete seriousness, like a child who wanted to impress a kind adult. He would make notes, check her responses, and then speak to me privately in the corridor outside my apartment. One evening, after she had fallen asleep early, he stood at my door and looked at me with that steady, honest gaze of his. "You are doing well," he said. "I am barely doing," I told him. He almost smiled. "That is still doing." I don't know why that stayed with me, but it did. The second week, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way I could point to and say that was the moment. It happened quietly, the way real things usually do. I had started telling her stories at bedtime. Dr. Mugisha suggested familiar voices, familiar rhythms, anything to gently pull her memory forward. So every night I would sit on the edge of her bed and talk about our childhood, about the family house in the older part of Nakasero Ridge, about Mama Jess's tomato plant and her burgundy curtains, and the way she used to spray her perfume at the front door before coming inside. She would lie there listening with her eyes wide, and sometimes she would ask questions. Was the house big? Did we have a dog? What did Mama look like? And I would answer every single one. One night she asked, "Auntie, did Mama love us?"
My throat closed. Yes, I managed. She loved you more than anything in the world. She nodded seriously, pulled the blanket up to her chin and said, "Good, because I love her too, even though I cannot find her." I turned off the bedside lamp and sat in the dark of that room for a long time after she fell asleep. A child who does not know its mother's face will still cry for her in the night. That was something Mama Jess used to say. I had heard it 100 times. I had never understood it until that moment. She was looking for herself, and she did not even know it. 3 weeks in, Justine finally came. She arrived on a Saturday morning, her twins running ahead of her as always, her face tired but her eyes full of guilt the moment she saw me open the door. She took one look at me, really looked at me and said, "Leila." Just my name, but the way she said it, I let her in without a word. When Mama Jess saw Justine, something flickered, a light behind the eyes, brief and uncertain, like a candle in wind. She stared at Justine for a long moment, then at the twins, back at Justine, and she said, "You have babies in your tummy," pointing. Justine laughed through tears. "Yes, 2 babies." Mama Jess reached out and touched Justine's tummy with both hands, very gently, and her face was so full of wonder that everyone in that room went quiet. Justine stayed for the weekend. She cooked, she sat with Mama Jess and sang old songs with her. She took the twins to the park downstairs so I could sleep for 3 uninterrupted hours, the best 3 hours I had experienced in weeks. When she was leaving Sunday evening, she held me at the door for a long time. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Don't be, just come back." She nodded. She came back every weekend after that. Kemi finally called from America on a Thursday night, 6 weeks after everything started. A real call, not a message. She looked thin on the screen, guilty in the way people look when they've been avoiding something and they finally stop. "How is she?" Kemi asked. I turned the phone so she could see Mama Jess sitting on my sitting room floor, building something out of the couch cushions with complete focus and dedication. Kemi put her mouth over her mouth. "Leila." "I know," I said. "I am coming home," she said. "Next month, I promise." I did not tell her that next month felt like a lifetime from where I was standing. I just nodded. It was around the 8th week that Dr. Mugisha said something that changed the temperature of everything. He had finished her checkup and she had fallen asleep on the sofa, and we were standing in the kitchen and he was writing in his notes. And he looked up and said, "There is progress, Leila, small, but it's there. The consistency you are giving her, it's working." I looked at him. "She called you by your name last Tuesday," he said. "Not auntie, your name." I had not told anyone that. I had been holding it like something fragile, afraid to speak it out loud in case it disappeared. "She said Leila," I confirmed quietly. He nodded. "Keep doing what you are doing." We stood in my kitchen in the kind of silence that is not uncomfortable, the kind that happens between 2 people who have been through something together, even if one of them was supposed to be just a doctor and nothing more. "You are not who I expected," he said eventually. "What did you expect?" I asked. "Someone who would have found another arrangement by now," he said honestly. I almost laughed. I thought about it. "But you didn't." "She's my mother," I said simply. He looked at me for a moment, then he went back to his notes. But something in that kitchen had shifted, and we both knew it, and neither of us said any other word about it. 6 months after Mama Jess came to live with me, she walked into the kitchen one morning while I was making tea, and she looked at me, really looked at me, and she said, "Leila, you look tired, my daughter." Not auntie, my daughter. I set down the kettle. I turned around slowly. She was standing in her nightgown with her hair loose, and her eyes were different, deeper, more present, like someone had come back into a room that was empty. "Mama?" I whispered. Her face moved through something complicated, confusion, recognition, something between the two. She pressed her hand to her chest like she was checking that she was real. "Leila," she said, slowly, like she was learning the word and already knew it at the same time. I crossed that kitchen in 3 steps and held her, and she held me back, not like a child holding an adult, but like a mother holding her daughter, and I cried. Properly this time, completely. Every tear I had stored and swallowed and pushed down for 6 months came out in that kitchen at 6 in the morning with the curtain still hot on the counter. She wiped my face, stood up, smoothed my dress, and said, "Mama, I am here." An old woman who has been lost in the forest does not forget the path home. She only needs time.
She was not fully back, not all at once. Memory does not return like a light switched on. It came in pieces, slowly, over the weeks that followed, fragments of herself returning like guests arriving late to a gathering. But she was coming back. She was finding her way. And somewhere in those 6 months, without planning it, without wanting it, without seeing it coming at all, I had become someone different too. The woman who hated noise had learned to sleep through a 5-year-old's early morning singing. The woman who guarded her space had learned to share every corner of it. The woman who said love was a distraction had spent 6 months proving that love was the only thing that was real. Dr. Mugisha and I had our first meal together. Not a checkup, not a corridor conversation, a real meal 3 months after Mama Jess started improving. He took me to a quiet restaurant in the newer part of Nakasero Ridge. I wore deep emerald green. He looked at me across the table like I was something he had been trying to find the right words for. We took our time. We were careful. We were honest with each other in the way two people are when they have already seen each other at their most real. He proposed 14 months later in the family house in the older part of Nakasero Ridge. Mama Jessie's house, her tomato plants in the yard, her burgundy curtains in the window. He asked her permission first. She cried and said yes before I even had the chance to answer for myself. I said yes too, obviously. We got married on a warm Saturday in the dry season. Kemi flew in from America and for once she was early. Justine came with her twins and her new baby girl, and she danced at my wedding like she had been saving that joy for years. Mama Jess sat in the front row in a champagne dress with her braids freshly done, and she watched me walk down that aisle, and her face was everything. 18 months after the wedding, I gave birth to twins, 2 girls. I sat in that hospital bed holding one in each arm, exhausted in a way that had no words, and I laughed. Not a small laugh, a real one, deep from the chest because God truly has a sense of humor. The woman who said children would ruin her life was holding 2 of them and feeling for the first time like her life had just fully begun. I told you, Mama Jess said from the chair beside my bed, her eyes wet, her smile enormous. You told me, I agreed. The river you refuse to cross will wait for you, and when you finally cross it, you will wonder why you ever stood so long on the other side. That is my story. All of it. The version I tell people when they ask me how I became who I am. I do not leave out the hard parts. I do not skip the nights I cried on the floor or the mornings I stood in the kitchen wondering how I would get through the day. I tell all of it because the hard parts are the parts that built me. My name is Leila. I never wanted marriage. I never wanted children. I never wanted any of this. And it is the greatest story of my life. There is a saying that has stayed with me through everything. The child who says the mother's love is too heavy has never tried carrying the world alone. Love your mother while you have her. Love her loudly. Love her without waiting for the right time. Because one day, you will give anything just to hear her call your name. A word before we go. If there is a mother in your life, call her. Not tomorrow, today. You do not need a reason. You do not need the right words. Just call. And if you have been running from something, love, responsibility, the very thing you swore you would never do, slow down. Look at what is chasing you. Sometimes it is not chasing you to destroy you. Sometimes it is chasing you because it belongs to you. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Leila made the right choice, taking her mother in alone, or should her sisters have done more? Was there a moment in this story where you saw yourself or someone you love? If you are Leila, would you have handled it differently? And finally, do you believe that God sometimes gives us the opposite of what we pray for because He knows better than we do? Drop your thoughts below. Every single comment gets read. Your voice matters here. Thank you for watching. This story was created with love for every daughter, every mother, and every person who has ever loved someone more than they ever planned to.